this is a training that is at your request. You have asked us to explain to you about safeguarding policies and procedures for Susila Dharma Nationals and Susila Dharma projects. So I am very pleased to introduce to you Sofia, legal name Diana Bayona Basurto, subud name Sofia. Sofia grew up in Amanecer, and many Colombians know her mother, who was very active in Amanecer at the time. Sofia left Amanecer, but the experience of growing up in Amanecer shaped her life path, and she can tell us more about that later. She went to Texas at 17, and she studied social work in the US, and practiced within adult services in Texas before moving to the UK in 2008, where she obtained her post-qualifying degree, specializing in working with children and families in 2015. Currently, Sofia is the team manager for a specialist team that works with migrant and separated children who are often at risk of trafficking and exploitation. She takes pride in her work and has made it her mission to educate professionals about the risks faced by the young people she supports. Sofia is married and has 2 young children who are her pride and joy. And Sofia is passionate about creating a community that recognizes the strengths of its people and what can be achieved through collaborative work. And we are grateful to have you, Sofia, with us. Thank you so much for bringing your expertise as a Subud member who's worked in protection of vulnerable populations to us. And we would like you all to participate by asking Sofia. She has a very diverse experience.
Well, hi, everybody. As Virginia said, my name is Sofia. I've been around in Subud for a long, long time. And I'm a social worker by trade. That is my area of expertise. I work for one of the local governments in England in the area of children's services and with migrant and separated children. I met Virginia last year at World Congress, and we made a connection. I said I wanted to support in whatever way I could. And this is the way we've found for me to be able to support Susila Dharma. The presentation today is aimed to be as simple as possible. It's about understanding a little bit about safeguarding, what that may look like, and as organizations and projects, what you should be thinking about in terms of safeguarding for the people you serve, but equally for the people that work for you. If I'm going too fast, let me know. I do tend to speak a bit fast, so I'm trying. I don't know if we want to go around with introductions. It's a very large group, so I think that might be a bit difficult. But it will be interesting for you to think about what you would like to get out of this session, because then there may be opportunity for follow-up sessions. In terms of the information we share here, it can be a bit triggering, some of the topics. So please be respectful of others. The idea is that we do share if we can, if you feel comfortable with sharing, but that we are respectful of others and of different opinions. Saying that, I'm a social worker. I'm not a solicitor. A lot of this is based on British law because that's where I work. But it does translate into most countries have a framework that this will work under. So I will invite you to sort of take it with a pinch of salt, because a lot of this is British law, but equally there's an application for it in your own countries. So first of all, we wanted to sort of set out the scene in terms of Susila Dharma International. So there is 2 layers as such. You have your national chapters. These are the organizations in each country, which have a role mostly of fundraising and distributing funds to associated members, but there are chapters that also have projects under their structure, such as Portugal, Congo, Indonesia. Then we also have the associate members or the projects. They're what we will say the doers. These are the people actually on the ground doing the work, usually funded by one of the national chapters or many of them. I hope that's correct, Virginia.
Is correct, but we are being asked by Angela to please speak slower,
Slow
a little
down,
slower.
yes. Slow down. Okay. Basically, what is safeguarding? Is actually a very simple concept, but it's a very complex way to actually achieve it. Safeguarding means protecting people's health, well-being, and human rights, and enabling them to live free from harm, abuse, and neglect. It is fundamental to high-quality health and social care. So, in essence, safeguarding boils down to protecting people from harm. So, is that better in terms of the speed? Okay. Who may be in need of safeguarding? I think all of us at some point or another would have been in need of safeguarding. But you have two main groups. Children, because of being children, not being able to advocate and represent themselves, and vulnerable adults. Vulnerable adults usually refer to the elderly, people with disabilities, people that may have mental health needs. And there is a duty for all governments and all places to protect these two particular groups. In terms of my end of the spectrum where I work, when things go really wrong, that's where they end up in the child protection arena, which is my arena. This is where I work. But in terms of the work that you may be doing, it is about prevention, recognizing abuse, and seeing how that fits within your frameworks. In terms of child protection, and this is under British law, you have the Children Act of 1989, which defines 4 types of abuse. Now, this encompasses a lot of information, but it boils down to 4 types of abuse. Physical abuse, which is what you will normally recognize as somebody harming somebody else physically. It may look like bruises, cuts, bites, and it may present from the child as antisocial behavior or fear of adults. We have sexual abuse, which a lot of people find difficult to talk about. It's a very taboo subject in many countries, and even in developed countries like the UK. This encompasses things like, I think a lot of people think sexual abuse is just having sexual relations with a person that is not in a position of power, a child, a vulnerable adult, but it's more than that. It can be things like groping. It can be things like forced marriage. Forced marriage encompasses pretty much all types of abuse. It can be female genital mutilation, which again is illegal in most countries, but is still culturally accepted in countries. So this type of abuse is things that we need to look out for. It doesn't mean it's happening. We just need to start to understand what abuse may look like and what we can do about it. Another form of abuse for children specifically is neglect, which may look like somebody that is not being fed appropriately, clothed appropriately, have a place to live. Generally speaking, and depending where you are, it could be confused with poverty. So you may have a family that is in poverty, but is not necessarily neglectful. So again, it's about starting to understand what some of these things will look like. Emotional abuse, generally speaking, is the most difficult one to spot. It's usually the things that we cannot see. It could be easily just screaming and shouting, but it could be things like gaslighting, making people isolated, using power to maltreat others in a way that is not necessarily visible. I'm not going into much in depth because what you will need to know is how to spot some of these signs, but not necessarily investigate it, because that's where the government bodies will step in. That is not, you are not child protection services. You're there to spot the signs, to have processes to be able to report those types of abuse. But in the end, it is up to the government or that government body, in this case, in the United Kingdom, Children's Services, to investigate allegations and to then take appropriate steps to safeguard those individuals. I put a slide on adult social care. This is the type of abuse that is seen in adult services. So we have two different types of legislation in the UK that cover children and adults. This focuses the Care Act on adults, but it overlaps with children's. So we similar type of abuse, physical, sexual, financial gets into this because it's for adults. So somebody that may abuse a situation where you could have access to financial accounts, to bank accounts or other, to support. Perhaps it's somebody that is meant to be supporting a person and is instead abusing that position. I'm not going to focus much on this because I think the great majority was interested in child protection. And what we said in terms of the focus of this discussion is more around how, as an organization, can we spot and then report or have mechanisms in place to be able to identify and report abuse. In British law, again, there's something called duty of care. It's again part of legislation. What that means is you have a duty of care to all of those receiving care and support in your workplace. This means promoting well-being and making sure that people are kept safe from harm, abuse, and injury. So the minute you start a project or you start a project, let's put it that way, you have a duty of care, not just to the people that you are serving, but to the people that are working within your organization. So you need to think about how you put those things in place. How do you protect those working for you, those volunteering for you? How do you protect those that are receiving a service from you? Having policies and procedures in place will help protect those receiving services from you as well as those working for you, which is why it's so important to start, if you don't have them in place, developing policies within the framework of the country that you work in. It was more about get you to think about any examples of policies or procedures that may already exist where you are that are designed to protect yourself and others. I don't know kind of who's here, but it's an important thing to think about because the idea is to build on what you already have in place. So that bit was just mostly to get you to think about that. So one of the things we discussed with Virginia was what can at times make reporting difficult. What makes people not be too keen on saying, I've observed something that I don't think is right and I don't know how to report it. And having grown up in a different country, studying in a different country, and now live in a different country, I think that social graces, which is a social work concept, is a very good way to start to understand why people may behave the way they do. So in the concept of social graces, we talk about things such as gender, geography. So, for example, I'm not white, I'm a Latin woman, born in Colombia, but live in the United Kingdom. That has given me a lived experience. I see the world in a way that I do due to my lived experiences. So your religion, your spirituality, your age, your ability, all of that will impact on the way you see yourself and the way others will see you. So that will inevitably have an impact on the way you feel comfortable about reporting things such as abuse. So, for example, if you lived in a country where women's rights are not something at the full front of the government or of the organization that somebody may be working at, reporting abuse will become very difficult, will be practically impossible. I'm sure people have heard sort of the differences of an experience of a white male as opposed to a black female. This is really to help you think about what may prevent people from supporting others or themselves reporting abuse, feeling confident in saying, hey, this is not quite right. Can we have a talk about it? Can we think about what this means? Going back to sexual abuse or FGM, forced marriage, this is widely culturally accepted in many countries, and culture is one of the social graces. So if you're in a position where culturally forced marriage is allowed, it may not matter to people that legally that may not be allowed. So how do you deal with that disparity? How do you feel comfortable about raising these issues? And as the organization, how are you as an organization supporting your staff to be able to say, I'm concerned about this? This is an exercise that we've done before. It is called personal social graces. And I will encourage you, if you can, to do it. It's about how taking into consideration the previous slide, and I can put it back. How would you describe your identity as a person? How might other people describe you? So how are you seen out in your community? What aspect of your social graces are visible and which ones are invisible? So there'll be times that, like, my religion or my spirituality or my sexual orientation will not be at the forefront. That may be because I don't want it to be, or because I don't feel I can express those views. How may this impact in your relationships? And how may this impact in your ability to safeguard yourself and others? I don't know if people want to have 5 minutes just to think it through and try. And if people want to share, that makes the conversation a little bit richer. So I will invite people to share, if they want, a little bit about their experiences. So there's your social graces, things like gender, geography, race, religion, age, ability, appearance, class, culture, ethnicity, education, employment, sexuality, sexual orientation, spirituality. And then the questions, I'm going to leave them there for about 5 minutes. And then if people want to give some feedback, that will be helpful.
What things do practitioners like ourselves in different fields need to be aware of in order to have the appropriate policies and procedures? So what Vivian is raising is something that many of us might not think of in our daily work, but when we're working with vulnerable populations, we should take that into account. What is the past of the person that we are working to support? So yes, thank you. There was another comment.
Yes. So I describe myself as a sociable person with loads of experiences around children of several ages and vulnerable populations. Yes. So what Victoria is saying is that's how she sees her role. But in that position where you're working with vulnerable children, how do you identify signs of abuse? And are there mechanisms for you to report that abuse? That's the next question. A big part of what we do is precisely that: raising, advocating, making sure that not because it happened once, it should happen again. But it is a very difficult system to navigate. And this is why when we talk about, particularly about policies and procedures, is where do we go? How do we do it? How do people recognize that there is an element of abuse or concern, and what do we do with that concern? Where do we go? We'll get to that in a little bit, but this is why, as organizations that are providing services out there, you need to start thinking as to how that would look in your area of work, because it will be different in, Congo or Portugal or the US or here, and we will need to have mechanisms in place to be able to support those that are raising a concern, because that's the most difficult part. And like some people have already shared, it can be very difficult to access services, even when those services are designed to be there to support people. So, yeah, unfortunately, I don't think we're going to find a solution here, but it is important to have the conversation. When I was asked about what my experience was when I was in Colombia, this is something I have spoken about before. We see the abuse, but it is so scary to actually do something about it because of the fear of repercussion. And that replicates in many, many cultures and in many, many countries, developed or not. It takes a very brave person to make that referral, to raise those concerns, because the outcome can be catastrophic for both the referrer and the potential victim or perpetrators. So, yeah, difficult topic of conversation, but one that needs to continue to take place. Then we've moved to something that sort of kind of fits into this, which is when somebody is in a position of trust, a person in a position of trust. In the UK, again, is defined as a person in a position in trust is someone who holds authority or responsibility over another, often with the potential to influence or control their actions. This can include roles in education, healthcare, social work, and various other professions. This includes the volunteer settings as well. Crucially, the concept highlights the power imbalance that exists when one person is reliant on another for care, guidance, and support. So again, what both contributors raise, you have been faced with abuse, you have gone to the authorities. These are your people in a position of trust, and you have felt that power imbalance. The police not taking your concerns seriously, or the people that are meant to be giving you services not doing what they're supposed to. How will that impact on you? How will that impact on your organization? So as a social worker, I'm acutely aware of how some of the decisions, some of the reports that I may write will have an effect on the young people I work with. So when I try to have conversations, we try to minimize the impact of that imbalance. But you can't control that. There will always be an imbalance of power. And you have to be able to recognize that when you're a volunteer providing health services in a country where there's no access to health, that puts you in a very, very powerful position. So those accessing those services may not feel empowered enough to raise concerns, because if something's happening to them, that this may prevent receiving those services that they desperately need, then what happens? This is why we have to be so careful about the people we employ, the people we accept as volunteers, because they will be in a position of trust, in a position of power. So how are we making sure that the people that are working with us are safe around the very vulnerable people we are supporting? So again, it's just thinking about some examples of that, and I think inadvertently we already spoke about, but it's things like a doctor and a patient. Oh, a teacher and a student. A teacher is incredibly powerful. They have a huge ability to shape what people think, what people are perceived as. Again, doctors have the ability to speak a bit more slowly. I feel terrible. And I was talking to Virginia a few days ago about power imbalances that might not be as obvious. You know, a doctor and a patient, obvious. Teacher and a student, very obvious. But this was an example in a country where health services were being provided. And as part of that, drivers were hired, I think is my understanding. And what ended up happening is that these drivers were asking for sexual favors in exchange for lifts to the health center or to transport packages and things like that. Inadvertently, we might have hired a driver that posed a risk to a very vulnerable person. And equally, we put them in a position of trust, in a position of power. So when you are setting up your projects, when you are vetting the people that are working for you, it's important to understand who they are, what is in place to make sure that these people do not place a risk to others. And again, processes and procedures will support that need. And I think this is, again, going back to that conversation we had earlier. When we talk about the principles of safeguarding, and as a social worker, I am very passionate about this because it's about working with people, not doing to people. So when we talk about the principles of safeguarding, we have 6 principles that we live by. One is empowerment. That means when possible, children and vulnerable adults should feel they can provide consent, make decisions about their care and their plans. So the idea is that we, when it's possible, include their wishes and feelings and try to make sure that they understand why there is a safeguarding being raised, what can be done about it, and what is their say. So that allows people to have control over that part of their life that can be quite difficult, especially if you have a parent that perhaps is being accused of abuse. You know, you work with that parent, you want that parent to be a part of that, you know, planning and making sure that their children are safe. Prevention, and this is where most of your projects will fall under. The whole idea that that it is better to prevent than to have to deal with a child protection issue or with an adult protection issue. So the idea is that is whenever you can, the best thing is to educate, to make sure people understand why we have concerns. So, and we go back a little bit to the principle of significant harm. So to get into the arena of child protection, there needs to be significant harm. Prevention is the most important part of safeguarding. If we can leave it at the prevention point, that will be the best. You know, to when things get to my level, things have gone really wrongly. I know how difficult it can be for women in certain countries to understand their own rights, to understand how they can protect themselves and their families. And often that's not spoken enough. So that work is invaluable because it empowers people to understand that oppression is not okay, that they have rights, that they have ways to find a different life. But that can be extremely difficult. And that can be, again, going back to social graces, being a woman in a place where you are not as powerful as perhaps other men or other people, can be incredibly difficult. So that piece of work that you are doing is incredibly valuable. And that falls exactly on those two principles of safeguarding. It falls under prevention, and it falls under empowerment. And those two are fundamental because that's what will get you to a better position in the future. So that's fabulous. The other four are about proportionality. Not because a child got hit does it mean this child needs to be, taken away from the family and in care. It doesn't mean that. You need to understand what the signs of abuse may be to then do some prevention work. And if you feel that this is still potential significant harm, that's when you will take it to the next level, to these protection agencies. So it is about proportionality, it's about understanding when to escalate to the next level. Then those agencies, we all have a responsibility to protect. So it falls under the protection principle. As a community, we have the responsibility to protect those vulnerable. You are already doing that. Is how you make sure that you're doing that safely. Then we talk about partnership. Nobody can do this alone. You need to work in partnership with the communities you live in, with the government, with the businesses that are around, with schools, with health services. You can't make a change on your own. It does require you having the difficult conversations. The vein of my existence is police. I see things very differently than police. And to try to bridge the gap, we have had to have some very difficult conversations as to how we're going to make this work for everybody. You won't see the change overnight. It will take years, but once you see it, it's beautiful to watch. So it can be done. It does take a lot of work, but it can be done. And accountability, which is why we're here. You need to be accountable on your role for safeguarding others. You have a responsibility. All of us have a responsibility to safeguard. And all of us need to be accountable for that. That's why you need to have policies and procedures in place that will demonstrate that you know and are actively safeguarding both the people that you are serving, but the people that are working with you and for you. So sounds simple to say, let's protect people from harm, but it does take a village. It's very, very difficult. It's a complex concept. As an organization, and I believe Adriana raised this, what are the things that we should do as an organization? You need to ensure that your staff, your volunteers, have a good understanding of what safeguarding means within their role and how to spot signs of abuse. So it's not enough just to talk about it. It's important to talk about it, but it's how do you spot it? What are the signs of abuse? What doesn't look quite right? Let's just have a think about, why is that child bruised, or why is that child behaving in a way that I don't understand? Let's just be a little bit curious about why. The why is very important. You have to be curious. Staff should be supported to understand where they can get guidance. So it may be very difficult to navigate how to raise safeguarding concerns. So your staff need to understand who can guide them through that process. It may be their line manager, it may be a designated safeguarding officer within your institution, uh, it may be somebody external, but there's got to be somebody that is able to guide that person through the process, and that will enable the concerns to be raised appropriately. Have clear policies and procedures that will protect those you're supporting and those working with you. This should include ways to ensure people working for us do not pose a risk to others. And I can't emphasize that enough, because when you do this type of projects, because they attract very vulnerable people, they also attract predators. I don't know how to put it gently. So in an environment where you're supporting people, you will also have people that will want to take advantage of others in vulnerable positions. So how do you make sure that people you have there are safe to be around? So here in the UK, you have recruitment processes. You have to go through an interview. You have to have references. You have to have police checks, or a DBS is a background check to highlight any criminal records. In my case, I have to have an enhanced one because I work with vulnerable children. We have a code of ethics that we have to adhere by. So your institution, your program should have something that is expected of your employees. This is the code of conduct. This is what we expect of you. Equally, they need to be willing to go through additional checks, put things in place that will ensure that we're making sure that we're not putting people at additional risk. Staff should know how to make a referral. So what are the steps? We were saying it before. What are the steps? So I am concerned about little Susie. There's something not right. What do I do? The first thing you do is you speak to your line manager. That will be the person that you report to. And then that person should have a policy that says, this is what we're going to do. We're going to ask a few questions. We're going to check a couple of things. And then what's next? Oh, well, this is probably significant. So we now have to send it to the appropriate government body. How do we do that? What is the process? Who reports? How is it reported? When is it reported? And in child protection, it should never be delayed. So it should be as soon as possible if you think a child is at risk of significant harm. But that means you need to understand your country policies, what is out there to protect. And then you should have a way to support your employee or your volunteer or staff member, because this is a very difficult process. It can be very traumatic. It can be difficult to navigate. So there should be support put in place to ensure those raising concerns are also protected. So things like bullying, so anti-oppression policies, because again, the power imbalances also exist within institutions and within programs. So that could be things that we talk about more in depth in a different session, but it's things that you need to start thinking about. How are we protecting not just the people that we're serving, but the people working for us? So what I will invite you to think about is, what does safeguarding look like in my area of work? What does it look like in the work that I'm doing, in the project that I'm supporting? What are some good practices already in place? So Diane Tessa, if I'm saying it right, he already shared some of the really good work that is being done around prevention, around informing, educating women in their area. So that's a really good baseline. What else can be done? How would I share with my team what safeguarding should look like for us? What does that look in the context of the work that we're doing? So like Adriana raised earlier, how does that look in perhaps the hotel setting, or in the education setting, or in the health sector. I love this little bit. It's based on the science of safety principles, and it talks about what is working well and what could we be doing differently. It's not about looking at the things that we've done wrongly. It's using the mistakes of the past to make sure that we build on them and create a more positive environment, a more positive, procedure. So it's about the best way to learn is to make mistakes. So it's best to try it and to figure out that that doesn't work and then build on that than to not try it at all. So the idea is here is that you have a real good go at what safeguarding looks in your area and what you can do to improve that. And then perhaps the biggest question is, what would you like to achieve in the next 6 months? Where would you want to be with your safeguarding policies within the next 6 months? Is it at this stage about, raising awareness and starting to write a policy? Or do you already have a policy that needs to be modified in bits and pieces? Or you have both, but you want to improve the quality? You want to actually put it in practices? Because what you see a lot is that there will be policies and procedures, but people either don't know them or they don't use them. So it's about thinking those things that are already in place and building on that. And I think that was it. That's where I was finishing. And again, I just kind of wanted to know whether you have found this helpful, whether you need anything else from me, any questions, anything else that I could support with. And that's where I am. Think about significant harm. Always think about significant harm. Now, if you have concerns, you should always discuss those concerns with somebody that has understanding of safeguarding policies, because what you want to do is decide if this needs to be a prevention piece of work or this needs to be reported to the authorities. And that it can be quite difficult. It's not about how many instances, it's about how significant it is. How does this put a child or a vulnerable adult in danger? Because the threshold for institution for people like me, child protection, is always going to be significant harm. Now, you will always rather err on the side of caution. And if you're not sure, it's best to report than not report.
Well, first of all, thank you, Sofia. This has been very, very interesting and a great amount of food for thought. What I wanted to say to add to this is that many times, here in the United States, teachers in schools and at universities are what's called mandated reporters. We are required to report suspicion of any kind of abuse. What I think would be helpful, and what some of us, as a professor who trained future teachers, we tried to do is create a kind of cultural awareness and sensitivity to the people we were serving, the children that we were teaching. As an example, here in California, there are people from all over the world who immigrate here. And in Central California, in particular, there were many Hmong people and had a healing practice called cupping, which I realize is used by many other cultures also. But it used to be that when the students would show up with what looked like burns or bruises on them, they would immediately be reported, and it set a chain of reaction that ultimately was not helpful. So what I'm saying is that as we become aware in our organizations and people in authority, it is good to have a kind of cultural awareness and sensitivity, what we are really dealing with.
Thank you, Mary. That does fall on the principle of proportionality. And again, if you link that with the social graces, that is a cultural issue. So I had the same issue with copying here. We had some boys that were doing copying, amongst themselves. What the proportional response to that is to ask some questions. Again, professional curiosity. What is this? What does it mean? And actually perhaps educate the family on why this is an acceptable thing to do in this country or not. So I work with a lot of boys that come from abroad where consent, for example, when it comes to sexual relations is assumed. And in the UK, it's very clear that people have to be able to give consent. So a big piece of the work that we do is on educating our Afghan boys or our Iranian boys on the issue of consent. How does it work? It may be okay over there, but it's definitely not okay here. And you will run into trouble if that does happen here. And we do it from a culturally sensible place. So that's when we talk about community work. So the best way to do that is through their own communities. So identify the leaders in your communities that can have those conversations. Because it can be quite difficult to have a conversation with a Muslim boy about sexuality, but their imam may be in a better position to do so.
Can I just comment on that, Sofia? Even when we identify leaders in the community to ally themselves with our projects, we also need to be careful.
Yes.
Because
Absolutely.
sometimes the leaders are not fully on board or sensitized with the values that we are trying to uphold. And we have had experiences in the past. I don't know if the Antesa could say maybe, well, we did have an experience with the head of the Musakil in Lemba Imbu, who himself, an older gentleman, took up with a very young child. And so we also have to be cautious that when we ally ourselves with community leaders, that they do not, that they are leaders that also support some of these values, because it can revert badly on us and undermine our own issue, what we're trying to promote, and the good reputation of our organization. Sometimes we don't know that, of course, we don't know this is going to happen, but we have to maybe dig a little deeper when we ally ourselves with these, let's say, community leaders. That doesn't mean it's not to accuse them, but it's just to say that we have to be cautious.
Absolutely. And again, that goes back to the cultural sort of aspect of it. Because even though forced marriage and childhood marriage is not okay, it still may be culturally accepted in many places. So here we talk about professional curiosity. So we always talk about the whys, but why is this person wanting to do that? But why is he a community leader? Why? Just to continue to ensure that we're not accepting things at face value, which is a very important thing to do, because often there's a lot of good intentions, but that doesn't mean that the people in these roles are necessarily well-intentioned. So it's how we navigate that, and can be very, very difficult, because like I said earlier, when you're working with vulnerable people, it is a perfect ground for perpetrators as well, because you're basically bringing them to them. So it's to be aware of who you are bringing to work with you, who you're partnering with, all of those things. So when I say, yes, go to a community leader, one that you know is, has a good track record. Because we've had it here as well. We've had radicalization within the mosques, and we've had to do a lot of work in identifying which mosques were safe and which ones weren't. Absolutely. I think, again, it is about having that support network around people. Can't do these jobs without a good support network. And that does include professionals, includes family, friends, and includes you understanding that you need to put boundaries in place, that you need to take care of yourself. It's very difficult when you're a caregiver to care for yourself. I had to learn that the hard way. You have to be able to put boundaries to say, I am going to do the best that I can in my role, but I also need to take care of myself because I cannot give from an empty cup. You have to take care of yourself. So all of those of you that are containers, that are always out there helping, supporting, running these programs, you're incredible, but you need to take care of yourself. Otherwise, it's going to take a toll. And I know it from firsthand experience.
Thank you so much, Sophia. This has been an amazing session. But I'm afraid it might be only the first of several because we've only scratched the surface. And I'm sure that for many of our project leaders, there will be many questions coming up regarding their own safeguarding policies and procedures and how they can fine tune them and how they can adjust them to their reality and how they can care for themselves. So I want to just say thank you for starting us on this route and invite us to close with a little quiet and take a moment of self-care for each and every one of us. Bless you all for what you do every day for your communities. Take a little moment of self-care now as we close and thank Sofia for her incredible presentation.